this historic Parliament House for this special celebration of our 40th anniversary year. It's the first time I've been in the building, and perhaps it's the first for others too. But what a glorious setting to celebrate our contribution to the life of Victoria. This is a special gathering just for those who have been our staunchest supporters, and I dare say there are some legends of dialogue amongst us. I know there are. And I just want to thank our two MPs for hosting us today, David Southwick and Paul Hamer, and I'll say a little bit more about them in a moment. But before I do that, I want to begin with an acknowledgement of country. As the psalmist says, speaking into both our faiths, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. And in his wisdom, the Holy One has given this land to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. So as we gather here in this special place, we acknowledge those who have lived and cared for this land for millennia before the coming of others from many lands. We commit to reconciliation with the traditional owners. We acknowledge their elders past and present, and we continue to work and pray for a just and peaceful relationship between all the peoples who dwell in this land we now call Australia. Given that we are in Parliament House, let me also acknowledge the support that the Council has received over these past 40 years from various branches of government, including grants and subsidies. Most welcome. And we note that the Governor of Victoria, in every instance, including the present one, since our founding in 1985, has been a patron of the Council, and we very much appreciate the honour that bestows upon us, just as we don't take lightly being hosted here today. Thank you. So now let me introduce to you David and Paul. I know known to many of you, but some perhaps not. David Southwick is the Liberal member for Caulfield. He first entered Parliament in 2011 and has held over 20 portfolio positions, including Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party until late last year. Apart from being a local member with a strong voice into the Jewish community in Parliament, he's the Shadow Minister for Police and Corrections, the Shadow Minister for Youth and Future Leaders, and Shadow Minister for Youth Justice. That's quite a load. Before entering Parliament, he had an events business and was a university lecturer and student advisor. Paul Hamer is the Labor member for Box Hill. And Paul first entered Parliament in 2018 and is currently Parliamentary Secretary for Jobs and the Acting Speaker. Paul has been Parliamentary Secretary for Economic Growth and Parliamentary Secretary for Economic Development. Like David, he's an advocate for the Jewish community, and together they chair the Parliamentary Friends of Israel. Before entering Parliament, he was an engineer and spent part of his career working in the transport sector. I imagine that's got a lot of relevance at the moment. At the moment, at the time of his election, he was only one of 31 people with an engineering background who have ever been elected to the House. And thus, it's not surprising that Paul is passionate about science, engineering, transport, and STEM. So I would invite them now to say a few words of welcome and to welcome everybody to this historic house, this historic house.
Thank you very much, Colleen. One correction. This is not our house, this is your house.
Yeah.
So we must never forget that, and it is always a real pleasure to come in here and work in such a beautiful building. We wanted to welcome you here today. As I said, I think today when I walk in the room, it is great. I love it when I come into Parliament and there's kosher in the room. And that's not because I am kosher, but it's the fact that we can bring a bit of us into this Parliament and continually reflecting towards, especially at this time. And I wanted to acknowledge particularly our Christian brothers and sisters that have stood very much alongside our journey especially over the last few years. It's been very, very tough since October 7, and unfortunately the Jewish community have not had as many friends as we would have liked. but the people in the room count as very, very special friends and those that are part of this movement. So I want to thank you especially for that. My good friend Paul Hamer, we're not always fighting one another in this parliament. We do have friendship groups. We believe this is the strongest and actually, especially at the moment, the most important parliamentary friendship group in the parliament. We have all kinds of parliamentary friendship groups of countries, of purpose, but this particular one brings people together when we have visitors. Paul and I took a group to March of the Living earlier this year, and it was the first time ever that members of parliament, both federal or state, went on a March of the Living trip, and it was something that certainly will live with all of us forever in terms of those important memories. Wanted to recognise especially our speakers later on, Julie and Tony. Tony is no stranger to this particular room, and they have certainly been, especially in more recent times, great friends to all of us, great friends to me in what they have been doing in the fight and struggle they have been doing in combating anti-Semitism, so thank you. And then finally, to our co-conveners, Colleen, thank you for the work that you do and the passion that you have, and to Alex. Alex and I often joke that I don't find, there are lots of events that I go to, but I don't think there is an event that I don't see Alex at. So he is everywhere, absolutely everywhere, and I'm very, very passionate in the cause and probably takes more selfie photos than I do. So, look, I won't go, it's not really the purpose for today to listen to me, but just other than to once again welcome you. It has been a really, really tough time for all of us. I think particularly in the last 24 hours, we've seen some of the state-sponsored terrorism with Iran, and then the flow and effect of what that does here in Australia, in Victoria, fire bombings of synagogues, targeted attacks on the Jewish community, unprecedented in terms of what we are living through at the moment. And I think it is really incumbent and important on us to continue the fight, continue the struggle, but most importantly, share the education. And this is a part of what I know you do, and probably even more important than all, at a time where we feel a bit deserted amongst everything, we need to keep the faith. And I think what you do in terms of the faith and the hope is just so important. I don't want to be political, but I will just briefly, and that is when we have every morning and we do the Lord's Prayer and the Welcome to Country, which is something that has more recently been introduced into the Parliament, you will find both Labor and Liberal in the Parliament, even if those are not of faith, certainly at least respecting the tradition, There is one party that stand outside the room and don't respect the tradition. I'll let you guess which party that is, but I think it is so important for us to understand who we are, where we've come from, where we are going, and at a time when some people have lost all faith and all purpose, I think we need to all come together in unity, in strength, and ensure that no matter who people are, no matter where they come from, we respect them, we work alongside them, and when they have problems and issues, we stand up for them. And that's not just our community, but it's all communities. Something that I've always been very proud of as a Jewish community. We're always first in line, fighting the cause against hate, and we would hope that sometimes that would be reciprocated, not necessarily more recently. Thank you very much for coming. Congratulations on a birthday, 40 years, and I'm sure this will be a wonderful event. And over to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, David, and I'd just also like to start by acknowledging the land of the Kulin Nation, the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. This is a really significant day for the council to have 40 years of a celebration, not just because we're in Parliament, but because of what that means, that ongoing dialogue for 40 years. I wanted to just reflect on a personal story. Well before I entered Parliament, and even before I had joined the Labor Party, I was involved in interfaith dialogue. Initially, particularly more as a sort of just as a post-uni student, but then in an area of Melbourne that there were not very many Jews. That it was really important to represent my faith and not representing the Jewish community, but representing the faith in a faith dialogue setting. And we do see so much conflict in the streets in Melbourne at the moment. We see a lot of conflict overseas, and I am such a strong believer that we are only going to get to the next stage through dialogue. And we need to be able to break down some of these barriers, and it's so important that you as a council have been able to continue this dialogue for now 4 decades, and continue, and through that you learn from each other and we grow as communities. Both communities grow from those learnings. So it's really a tribute, particularly to the co-conveners, Alex and Colleen, and everyone who has come before you in serving on this on the council, and every member who has participated, everyone who's here today, and everyone who's participated in the council activities over the last 4 decades, because the importance of what you have done cannot be understated. So congratulations again, and I look forward to this event.
I could also recognise Viv Ewing, our Multicultural Commissioner.
Stay there, don't move.
We checked with protocol and we discovered that we are allowed to present you gifts, so we have gifts for the two of you. Thank you very much for hosting us, and we know you have to leave before the end, so we've got some gifts to present to you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Colleen. Thank you so much.
And since you said, let's do a selfie. All right, thank you very much. Thank you. It now gives me, I'm sure most of you may know me. My name is Alex. I'm the other co-chair of the council. So particularly, David, just before you leave, if you, not leaving, I want to thank both of you, and particularly I want to say that I've known both of you since before you entered Parliament. Paul and I knew each other at school, and David and I knew each other soon after that, so it's lovely to see where you've ended up and to see you both representing your communities and our community so beautifully. So thank you again for what you said, for what you do, and for hosting us here. Before we invite our special guest, since it is our 40th anniversary, I want to give just a little bit of background for those who may not know a little bit about the Council of Christians and Jews. Before that, I want to thank, firstly, I can't name and recognise everyone here, but I want to thank you all for being here and thank you for coming and giving up your afternoon to make a special effort to be here. I do want to point out 3 people. Risha Rosen, Faye Haskin-de Broen, and Kathy Kaplan in absentia, who this morning had to go to a hospital, so she's not here. But all 3 of them, firstly, all 3 of them have an OAM, which shows you their dedication to everything that they do. But more importantly, it was their idea. They spearheaded the idea of having this function here. You saw Risha and Faye serving the food, so we want to thank them. Can we recognise them, please? For having the idea for this particular function, for making it happen, so thank you for that. And as I said, we wanted to do this function, and particularly in this place, because it's certainly worth celebrating 40 years of achievements, and it's actually the first in a number of events that we're doing this year. I'll tell you more about some of them at the end, but let's start by saying that the reason why we're here today is because in 1947, following the end of World War II, a number of leading Christians, together with a handful of Jews, got together in Selersburg, Switzerland, for a gathering that was officially called an Emergency Conference on Anti-Semitism. Sounds a little bit familiar. The goal then was to create avenues for dialogue between Christians and Jews in order to avoid a repetition of what just happened during the war. The conference produced what is now known as the 10 Points of Selersburg and created the forerunner for what became the International Council of Christians and Jews. These 10 points are still the underlying framework for Jewish-Christian dialogue everywhere. And after that came the 1965 Catholic Church's Nostra Aetate Declaration and then the World Council of Churches 1967 report on the Church and the Jewish people. This prompted Jews and Catholic leaders in Australia to act, and though there were a few false starts, the Council of Christians and Jews finally formed in 1985 with the likes of the late Rabbi Ronald Lubovsky, the late Sister Shirley Sadawi, the well-respected Rabbi John Levi, who sent his apologies and can't be here today, and Sister Mary Lawton, who is here, and we thank her for being here. They and others were responsible for creating what we have today, this very council, and it became the first of a number of councils across the country. There are now councils of Christians and Jews in every major capital and a national roof body. In those 40 years, we have had and continue to have many talks, presentations, discussions, seminars, publications, conferences, and even a successful trip to Israel at one point. The Council also continues to be a thought leader in some of the topics that both divide and unite us, and in many ways, given the times that we find ourselves, this work is more important now than it has ever been, which is why we are so keen to celebrate our 40th year as we look forward to our 41st and beyond. With that, let me hand back to Colleen to introduce our special guests, and then we'll have a panel, and I should have said at the beginning, as you see, as he always does, I'm going to point out Mark, who's recording this event, and so we're recording. We also have a photographer. If you don't want to be in any photos, let us know, but we want to document this as much as we can, so thank you. And just before I finish up, while I still have the floor, there's plenty of food. You're very welcome to get up and take food and bring it back to your chairs, and at the end there'll be time for dessert as well, so make sure you have it, there's plenty of it. So let me pass over to Colleen, who'll introduce our special guests. Thank you.
It's my great delight to introduce you to Julie and Tony. Tony Lupton is a former Labor MP who served as a member for Prahran in this place from 2002 to 2010. He's also a barrister, so look forward to some good speaking, and senior tribunal member, a classic car enthusiast, and a part-time racing driver. He writes about politics on Substack. Julie Szego is a former lawyer, was an age journalist and a columnist for more than 2 decades. She's an author, recently published in Rupture, and freelance contributor to various publications, including The Australian. And she also writes about politics and life on Substack. Tony was raised Roman Catholic. Julie is Jewish. They have 2 daughters, Sara and Hannah. But listen, this is a warning. If you're invited to their home in December, wear wool, which does not burn, because between the Christmas tree candles and the Chanukah candles, it could pose a fire hazard. And they're going to discuss with us today their journey through faith, truth, family, and their presentation is entitled From Our House to the People's House, Walking Together. And there'll be a conversation for about half an hour and then plenty of time for Q&A to follow. So welcome to Tony and Julie.
Hello everyone, and thank you for the invitation to be here, particularly to Paul and to David and to the committee of the council. It's a great pleasure for the 2 of us to be here today and to have this conversation, and hopefully a conversation that becomes broader than just the 2 of us. And it's terrific, personally, just to see so many good old friends here, some of whom I haven't seen for too long, so welcome everybody.
Thank you everyone, it's a pleasure to be here. Tony and I have been together for nearly 26 years now.
Come October.
That's right. And I mean, when I first met you, you were fair to describe you as a lapsed Catholic. Though I do remember that on troubled days you would still sometimes go to St Patrick's Cathedral and sit there for a bit of solace. You deny that now, but I remember that happened. I can't deny it. Yeah. So what we propose to do is talk separately about our backgrounds, our journey through faith or through faith and truth, and then talk about how we navigated our lives together as a Jew and a Catholic. So Tony, why don't you start and tell us about your upbringing, your background?
All right, so I was brought up in a Catholic household, and my father came from a Catholic family, mainly Irish Catholics. My mother was brought up an Anglican, mainly from an English background. So this is, I suppose, back in the days when sectarianism, as we would call it now, was probably more pronounced still, particularly between Catholics and Protestants. There was still a lot of that schoolyard banter, that we would call it, back in those days, chants and things of that sort. But I think the essentially important points about it were that my father was a very firm Catholic. He had incredible faith, but he didn't talk about it. He didn't describe it. He didn't really try to instill anything in me about it in terms of religious prescription. But my mother was, on the other hand, an Anglican, which in her case really meant she wasn't particularly interested or engaged with religion. My father was, of course, because of its strictures, would attend Mass every Sunday, and that was our job to go along and go to Mass. My mother went along reluctantly. I remember her saying to me many times that until she got married and had to convert to Catholicism in order to get married, she'd never been to a church where she was told from the pulpit how to vote. But once she started going to a Catholic church, she was always told how to vote whenever there was an election coming along. And she found that very troubling, and she often talked to me about that as an example of the way that religion didn't sit well with her in terms of its, I suppose, what we'd call now the separation of church and state, in a sense. But so I had those two currents. One was a fairly strict Catholic parent. The other parent really not very much engaged in religion at all. But they definitely both wanted to instill in myself and my brother the importance of the essential values of religion, which I think they were successful in doing, because I certainly grew up with a social conscience, which I hope I've been able to employ in a range of ways, in work and other activities and in the years since. So that was the start of the upbringing, and then it went to Catholic school, which we can talk about too.
Yeah, I'm interested hearing this story again, though of course I've known the story for some time, that the dynamic between your parents involved essentially one side of the equation capitulating to the other, so the Anglican capitulating to the Catholic.
Yes, I mean, I don't think there was ever any question that in order to get married, my father would become an Anglican, for instance. I don't think that was on the table.
But hold that thought, patterns repeat across time, don't they? But when I met you, I mean, you were certainly not a Catholic then. So you went through Christian Brothers College, something happened, right? Or perhaps?
Yes.
Were never a believer in the first place?
Look, I probably wasn't a great believer in the first place. And as I said, there was never any real effort at understanding what the real point, in a sense, of religion was. It was just something you were expected to do. And when I was a real youngster, to the mid-60s, going back to what Alex said about papal enunciations, when I was in primary school, the Catholic Mass was still in Latin. Priests faced the altar with their back to the congregation, and you really couldn't understand any of it. So, I mean, I suppose that would have been up to when I was about, I don't know, I suppose 8 or 9 years old. Yeah, so it's so we went along to this thing that was in fact completely foreign, and came out at the end of the hour or so after having been blustered at from the pulpit for a period of time, and just went home and thought, well, you know, I've done whatever the duty is. But there was nothing really more foundational to it than that. The school was really quite instrumental in me ultimately really just drifting off from it and essentially just coming to atheism, really. But in those days, corporal punishment was the significant method of discourse. Random acts of violence were a daily occurrence. Sometimes the extent of every student in the classroom just being lined up around the wall to get 6 at the best. And it was frankly a shocking experience, which it took years to get over. I remember one of the very important ways that I did get over it was that they did throw me out of Christian Brothers College at the end of year 11. They didn't think I was going to be much of a success. I don't think they'd really given a lot of thought to what might have been my potential, but it was really just a matter of I didn't fit their way of looking at the world. So I hadn't been back there for a long time until I got elected to the Parliament, and I became their local member, and all of a sudden I was a Christian Brothers College success story. And they asked me to come and address the school assembly, and, which I had pleasure in doing, and it was frankly, one of the best things about being elected to Parliament, Paul and David, was the opportunity to re-engage in a completely different way with my old school. And I formed some friendships with some of the former Christian brothers, strangely, and got some interesting counsel and advice and views from them over the years while I was the member. But the experience at that school certainly had a very, very important effect on my approach to religion. I think I felt the view that it was the values of religion, untainted by the superstructure of the church, were the things that I believed in and still believe in. But the institutional power of the church I found extremely troubling.
And then you met somebody with a very fierce sense of her own Jewishness, somewhat idiosyncratically defined, as is the Jewish story often. So my parents were both from Hungary. My mother was brought up, both from rural Hungary. My mother was brought up in an Orthodox Jewish family. She was one of 6 children. During the war, the family was, for the most part, deported to a labour camp and not the death camps. So they survived, save for my mother's, an older brother of my mother's, who she was very close to and loved very much. And he was enlisted in the slave labour battalions by the Hungarian collaborationist regime, and he died on the Russian front. That was a source of great sorrow for my mum and her family. After the war, she, for her part, completely rejected religion. She became a good communist, marching pregnant in the Labour Day parades and that sort of thing. She stayed on in Hungary. And while she always had a bit of sentimental attachment to her past, she rejected it fairly vehemently. She had a particular animus against rabbis. She was of the belief that the rabbis had failed to warn the Jewish communities during World War II what was coming, and she often expressed that animus. Though she knew not all Arabs, not all rabbis were complicit in this. Her view was that the community had been let down, and I want to acknowledge Rabbi Morgan, who is here today, who heard the whole history of the family and the family's eccentric views about such things, and gave both my parents a very sensitive and very beautiful send-off. My father has a slightly, perhaps the more interesting story. His father converted the family to Catholicism in the 1920s, and to protect the family from the anti-discrimination, from the discriminatory laws and quotas and so on in pre-war Hungary. So the family knew that they were Jewish. There was still, at that time, one of the grandparents alive who, in the home, kept a bit of sentimental attachment again to Jewish tradition, but outwardly they were Catholic. They had a Christmas tree every year. My father, for the rest of his life, had a bit of a thing for Christmas. So even when I was growing up, we would have a Christmas tree at our beach house down the Mornington Peninsula. And this was a sort of cellophane number. It had a whole lot of stuff on it. It had everything. It had cotton wool, it had baubles, it had sparkles, it had sweets. And I remember my brother-in-law came once and looked at this tree very disdainfully and said, "That is the most overdone Jewish Christmas tree." And my grandfather, who survived World War II, actually described the family as, he said that my religion is Roman Catholic, my citizenship is Hungarian, and my nationality is Jewish. So he became a great Zionist, and so my parents met in Hungary. They defected after the 1956 revolution to Israel, where they were there for 2 years. It was a pretty irreligious Israel back in those days, and they came to Australia in the early 60s. And it was a very assimilationist Australia that they arrived to. My father started off, he got a job as a cleaner at the Royal Melbourne Hospital. He was already a doctor. He had his qualifications as a doctor and a psychiatrist from Hungary. But he had to take a job first off as a cleaner as he converted his degree, and he encountered some anti-Semitism from the German orderlies at the hospital. But other than that, I think my parents were really seen as European migrants, more in that mould, not really necessarily as Jews. And so, for instance, my mother, when she had afternoon tea with the ladies from, the Black Rock Primary School, where my sister was enrolled, they were horrified because they said to her, "What would you like in your tea?" And she said, "I would like lemon." And they were absolutely, there was this moment of this gasp in the room. That was the sort of Australia it was then. And I even recently asked I've got an older sister who was in primary school when my parents came here, and I said to her, "Do you remember when you were growing up lighting candles on a Friday night?" And she said, I have no memory of that." So I don't even think there was much cultural Judaism particularly back then. I think things started to change certainly after the 1967 war, where I think that there was a kind of Jewish consciousness that swept a lot of the diaspora communities. It was certainly when my dad developed a habit of listening to the news on the radio every hour on the hour, a habit that kind of lived on after the war. And Then when I came along, my mother who's a doctor, didn't know where to send me to kindergarten. And I mean, I didn't even speak any English. I just spoke Hungarian because I had a Hungarian nanny back in those days in the 70s. They didn't care it didn't kind of occur to them that it might not be the best thing to send a child to kindergarten not speaking English when they live in Australia. But she was worried about where to send me, and she had a patient called Mrs. Schmidek. And Mrs. Schmidek said to my mother, well, I am a kindergarten teacher at Yavna College, a Jewish school. Why don't you send your little girl there and I'll take care of her? And my mum said, okay, fine. And as a result of this decision, I was then educated in the Jewish day school system. And I think it was the influence from me that over time meant that the family started to light candles on a Friday night. And so I think by the time I met Tony, we
It certainly was
had a bit in common, but we had a bit to navigate.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, because feeling Jewish and being a Jewish person was very important to Julie. Yeah, and that was clear. And by that time, the family embraced that very much as well. So there was a little bit of navigation, but it probably, in a sense, wasn't as tough a concept as perhaps even my mother and father having to bridge that gap between Catholicism and Anglicanism, which they never really did. Because it was a secular relationship with these cultural elements integrated into it.
Certainly, so it was a secular relationship, that's true. I remember I felt that I had to vet your views on the Middle East, but they never caused me any trouble. And I know that at the time I remember that I very much wanted you to read my dad's memoir, which I was working on.
Oh yes, that was the time when many of you in the room will have read Two Prayers to One God, Julie's father's main book that he wrote. Julie edited and translated it from the original Hungarian into English, and I think you were up to about chapter 3 when we formed a union. And it was interesting because that, in a sense, it meant that what you were working on every day, translating and editing that book, became a part of our initial conversation, and that made, I think, a big difference in terms of understanding where we were coming from.
Yes, that's right. So my father was deported to Auschwitz. He survived the death camps during the war. He wrote a memoir, and the title of it, Two Prayers to One God, comes from an episode in the book where he was under a kind of lice-infested blanket in a bunk together with an Orthodox Jewish boy, and that Jewish boy died next to him in the barracks, and he realised that he didn't know a Jewish prayer to say over the boy's body, and so he started whispering a Catholic prayer that he knew, and it was his sense that they were both people of faith, but there was only one God. That's where the title of the book comes from. So I did edit.
Very good metaphor for the Council for Christians.
For the Council,
we should say.
Yes, that's right. And so I remember that, yes, you helped with the memoir quite a bit. And then we had a discussion where I said to you that if we were going to be going forward and serious, and that I would have to have children. And so I emotionally blackmailed you into that one. And then I said to you that...
I paid up, believe me.
And I said to you that if if that happens, that our children, you have to understand that our children have to be Jewish, not just that they would be Jewish as a matter of Jewish law, but that you would have to understand that they would need to have a Jewish consciousness and understand that they were Jewish, and I guess that was it.
And I was very happy with that.
But you had a few conditions of your own.
I
One,
did,
really. What was
yes,
that?
that's true. Well, Julie said, well, any children, they do have to be Jewish. I said, we'll agree on that as long as any children we have follow Collingwood. And they do.
And I thought that was overall a fair bargain.
I'm not sure which is easier actually and which is harder. Come September every year, you know, it's a tough ask. Anyhow.
So this went along happily enough. In keeping with my family tradition, we do have a Christmas tree and the Chanukah candles come December.
There's a mezuzah on the door.
There is a mezuzah on the door. That's pretty much down to you. You brought one home from Israel once. And everything more or less went along okay. We had a bit of a moment of tension when we got a family dog, and we had to decide what to name the family dog. We named our children Sara and Hannah, and they were names from my family, but they were names that also doubled as Irish names, and their middle names are the names of Tony's grandmothers. But I wanted to name the dog after my father's family dog, Ferdinand, who was Ferdinand I. And he was a dog who waited for my dad at the home of the local priest in the village where my dad grew up. He took care of the dog from the time when Jews had to hand in their dogs and they were confiscated by the regime. And that dog waited for my dad when he was there waiting for him when he came back from the death camps. And then he had another Ferdinand after that. Then I had a Ferdinand growing up, that was Ferdinand III. And I was all ready, and there was a little bit of pressure at that time from my father, to name our dog Ferdinand IV and effectively make the dog Jewish. I guess, and this will be a subject of an essay that is a work in progress that I'm working on, and I presented this to Tony pretty much as a fait accompli, and he said no. He, on this occasion, would not roll over.
No, we had to compromise on the dog's name. I had a very affectionate memory of my childhood dog, Scamp, and we ended up, we decided that we would try and make some kind of fusion of these things, the letter S, the letter F for 30, and we ended up coming up with a made-up name where we call our dog Seffi. And as soon as we said Seffi's going to be the name of the dog, Sara and Hannah were just delighted, and they just said, yes, he has to be Seffi. So that was the end of that. We went to the Court of Appeal, and it was done.
So it all went along, and then post-October 7, it seems that now the full import of what you signed on for has hit. I know that you have lost friends recently.
I like to say I haven't lost any friends, I just found out they weren't my friends. That's the way I look at it.
And it's been hard, hasn't it? It's been hard coming to terms with what we perceive as a sudden loss of status or security in Australia.
Yes, I think that's one of the things that's hardest, but to put a kind of Irish Catholic spin on it, if I might, the best elements of all of this, it's not about the so-called friends who are lost, it's the people who have come out of the woodwork who have shown that they're true friends, to us and to the wider community that I think is the most valuable and most positive thing that we can see in the last 2 years. And there's been a lot of that. And we see these appalling marches that are allowed to go on out here every week. But the things that are not as publicly obvious are the good people who are there with you and let you know that they are there with you.
Yes, it's been difficult. There's been moments, haven't there? A lot of me unproductively threatening to leave the country.
Yes, well, Seffi won't leave the country, and neither will Sara and Hannah. So it's a bit of a dilemma. I mean, Julie has often in the last 2 years said, "I don't think there's any hope here in the long run, and I think Israel's the only answer." And I can certainly understand that. But I can't give up on Australia either, and I think that the work we have to do here is too important to walk away from, even though Israel is there for that reason. I don't think that we can do that.
There was a point where you even offered to convert, and I said, "Don't be ridiculous."
Yes, you did. Yes.
Yes. What was going on?
Yeah.
What was going on?
Look, it's an odd concept, isn't it, for an atheist to offer to convert? Not quite sure what you convert to in that sense, but I think the issue is I don't know. I suppose just over the quarter of a century that Julie and I have been together as a family, I've probably developed more of I don't know. It's a love affair that goes beyond Julie and our daughters, and I do value the community, the Jewish community, highly. It's been a very important part of my life for decades now. I honestly don't think I need to convert to be part of the community. I've been welcomed into the community with open arms for a long time. So. But it was just after October 7 and after the months that unfolded after that, it just seemed to me that I was thrashing around trying to find what it was that I could do. And in the long run, it wasn't to convert or do anything like that. It was to do what I knew how to do. And together, what we know how to do, and that's to act politically, to write, to speak, and to convince. And I think that was the outcome of that conversation. So I'm glad you told me it was ridiculous, because we went on and I think did better.
A nice gesture nonetheless. Well,
so that brings us to the present day.
That brings us to the present day.
I think, as far as we're concerned, I'm sure we've managed to navigate different cultural and social upbringings and backgrounds extremely well. I think our daughters understand the nature of those backgrounds extremely well, and they are very comfortable in that and in themselves. I think that's probably our greatest success.
I think so.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Julie and Tony. When I first asked them to speak and to do so together, they were a little reluctant, if I recall, because they weren't quite sure how it was going to work and what they would say, but I think they've been able to show of how very much a microcosm they are of this council, and I think that worked out beautifully, so thank you very much for sharing your story. I certainly learned a lot. I thought it would be, you'd be the Catholic, not you'd be the Catholic, so that's very interesting to learn. And my aunt also married a non-Jewish guy who equally said, "Why would I convert from atheism?" So I've never heard that before, so thank you for reiterating that. So before we finish up, if Colleen could join me, we have a little gift that we'd like to present to you, and because you're a couple, it's a joint gift. So if you can get a photo of this.
Have a bag.
In a bag.
In a bag. It's in
Lovely bag.
Well, it's in a bag. You can come join us. You can take.
We can hold the bag.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Okay.
You're left holding the bag.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. And no, 1, 2, 3.
Okay. Thank you very much. And just a couple of last comments.
Thank you.
So before we conclude, you may have seen some sheets on your seats about upcoming events. If you're not already, please join our mailing list so that you can find out about the details of these events. I want to particularly draw your attention to our event on Wednesday, November 12. Unlike this more intimate private event, that one's going to be our big birthday gala bash. So please come along, and like all birthday parties, it's going to feature a cake, plenty of nostalgia, keynote speeches by some prominent members of society, and excitedly for us, also the launch of Gesher 2025. For those who've known the council for a while, you'll know that over 30 years we published a very, very well-respected journal, which was founded by Ben Meir, who's with us today. This year, we suspended it for a couple of years, but this year for our birthday we've been able to secure some funding, and so a well-committed editorial team has been putting it together, and we're going to publish it again. And this edition will celebrate our 40 years with articles about the history of our council, about the history of Gesher, and about many other achievements and successes over the years, as well as some articles about contemporary religious and interfaith issues. It promises to be a great edition, and the event on the 12th of November also promises to be a great event, so diarise that now. You'll certainly get more info about it, and we look forward to seeing you there. And just before we finish up, we have the room till 2:30, so please stick around. There's plenty of food, there's particularly plenty of dessert, so stick around. Thank you again, it's been wonderful. Final words.